This happened back in 2009 when I was working IT for a small telecommunications company in Portland, Maine. The place had that weird energy where you couldn't tell if it was barely legal or barely functional. But I was 23, broke, and the paychecks were consistent enough that I didn't ask questions. I was the only woman on the tech team. After spending those first few weeks proving I could troubleshoot servers and handle emergency calls just as well as anyone else, the guys finally stopped looking at me like I'd wandered into the wrong building. Eventually, I switched to the Wednesday through Saturday night shift, 1 p.m. to midnight. The trade-off was 3 consecutive days off, but it also meant that after 6 o'clock, I was the only living soul in that entire office. The building sat in one of those sad business parks on the edge of town, the kind with empty lots and for lease signs that never came down. Behind our office stretched a dense patch of forest with a walking trail that the city had apparently given up on maintaining years ago. No lights, no markers, just darkness pressing against the windows. During those long shifts, I'd take breaks to walk the halls or grab a soda from the basement vending machine. That lower floor always unsettled me. A long corridor lined with massive windows that looked directly into the woods. At night, the glass turned into perfect mirrors, showing your reflection with the blackness behind it. Sometimes I'd see movement out there, just beyond my ghostly double. Dear, I'd tell myself. Just dear. One night in late October, I headed downstairs around 9 for my usual soda run. The shift had been quiet, almost too quiet, and I was fighting to stay awake. The basement air felt different that night, colder, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I was halfway to the vending machine, counting quarters in my palm, when something flickered near the window. A quick darting motion, like someone stepping backward into the trees. My hand froze mid-count, heart suddenly hammering. I stared into that wall of darkness. Nothing, just my own pale face staring back at me. You're being paranoid, I thought. There's nothing out there. I forced myself to keep walking to the machine. The can clunked down into the tray with a metallic echo that seemed too loud. As I bent to retrieve it, a sharp ping rang out behind me, the unmistakable sound of something striking the glass. I went completely still. Slowly, I turned around. The window was empty, but every instinct I possessed was screaming that someone had just been standing there, watching me. I didn't walk back to the stairs. I ran, taking them 2 at a time, my soda clutched like a weapon, and I didn't stop until I was back in the main office with the door locked behind me. For the next 20 minutes, I sat at my desk trying to rationalize what I'd heard. A branch, maybe a bird flew into the glass. Totally normal explanations. But then that crawling sensation started again, the feeling of being observed. I peeked over my cubicle wall toward the front entrance, and my stomach dropped straight to the floor. There was a man standing outside the glass doors, tall and gaunt, wearing a stained jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. Even from across the room, I could tell something was deeply wrong with him. His face looked bruised, smeared with dirt or something darker, and he was swaying slightly as he peered inside. I dropped below the cubicle wall before he could spot me. The doors were locked. I'd made sure of that, but it didn't stop him from trying. The sound of the handles rattling cut through the silence. Then the rattling got more violent, more desperate. When I dared to look again, he was yanking at the doors with both hands, his face pressed against the glass. Then he went still, his head turned, and somehow he looked directly at where I was hiding. Our eyes met through the glass in the distance. I'll never forget that stare. Empty and focused at the same time. Then he slammed both palms against the door, so hard the entire frame shuddered. I dropped under my desk and dialed 911 with shaking fingers, whispering to the operator that someone was trying to break into my building. While I was talking, the noise stopped. When I looked up, he was gone from the entrance. "Stay where you are," the dispatcher said. "Officers are 3 minutes out." Before I could respond, something crashed against the door with tremendous force. A rock, easily the size of a softball, had cracked the top glass panel. I screamed into the phone, then covered my mouth with my hand. "Ma'am, did he get inside?" "No," I choked out. "Not yet, but the glass is breaking." Those next few minutes felt like hours. The building was silent except for my ragged breathing and the distant wail of approaching sirens. Another impact. Another crack spreading across the glass. Then finally, blessedly, red and blue lights flooded the windows. When the police arrived, one of the door panels was hanging crooked, and the rock was lying just inside the entryway. The man had vanished into the night. Officers swept the parking lot and the tree line with their flashlights, but he was gone. My boss arrived shortly after, then my husband. I was escorted home and told to take the rest of the week off. When I returned, I learned they never caught him. I told the police I suspected it might have been connected to a former employee who'd been fired a few weeks earlier for stealing equipment. He knew everyone's schedules. He knew I worked alone. I quit exactly 1 month later. My new job was at another call center, but this one had security cameras, multiple shifts, and people around all hours. I still think about that night sometimes. The sound of that rock hitting the glass, the way his face looked in the reflection, the terrible knowledge that if he'd broken through just 60 seconds sooner, no one would have found me until morning. I just finished my first year at university in Burlington, Vermont, when I landed a job dispatching cabs for my boyfriend's cousin. It was a small operation, just a few drivers in a cramped office, but the pay was decent and nobody cared if I brought my laptop to play games between calls. For the first couple weeks, I worked day shifts. Then the owner decided to go 24 hours. Guess who got stuck with the overnight rotation? 3 or 4 nights a week. I'd be there from midnight until 8 in the morning, alone except for whichever driver was on duty. The guy who usually worked those shifts was named Marcus, a big, friendly man who stood over 6 feet and probably weighed 300 pounds. Health issues made him move slowly. So he wasn't exactly someone you'd call for backup in an emergency, but he was kind and reliable. That counted for something. That particular night started like any other. Around 1:30 a.m., Marcus got called to pick someone up in a neighboring town about 15 minutes away. He grabbed his keys, said he'd be back soon, and drove off into the night. I settled back at my desk and returned to my game. The office had large windows facing the street, and from my desk I could see the front door, the waiting area, and most of the parking lot. About 20 minutes after Marcus left, I saw movement reflected in my laptop screen. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I heard breathing, heavy, labored breathing. I froze, looked up. There was a man sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I hadn't heard the bell above the door ring. I had no idea how long he'd been there. He had greasy hair pulled back in a long, matted rat tail, his face buried in his hands, panting like he'd just sprinted a mile. His clothes were filthy and torn. My first thought was that he'd been in an accident or a fight. "Do you need a cab?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Nothing. He didn't even look up. "Sir, do you need a ride somewhere?" When he finally raised his head, I took an involuntary step backward. His face was covered in cuts. Blood was running down from a wound on his scalp. And when I looked closer, I could see more blood on his shoulder and leg. "I just want to go home," he muttered. "I need Marcus to drive me. I live about 20 minutes from here." I grabbed the radio with trembling hands and called Marcus, telling him someone was waiting at the office. He said he'd be back as soon as he could. While I waited, I stayed near the front windows where anyone passing by on the street could see me. Something about this man felt wrong. All wrong. "Maybe I should call you an ambulance," I suggested, trying to sound helpful rather than afraid. "You're bleeding pretty badly." That's when everything shifted. "You don't need to do that," he said quickly. "It's not like I killed nobody. I didn't kill nobody." My blood turned to ice. "I just want to go home," he repeated. "You don't gotta call anyone. I ain't done nothing wrong." The guy had it coming. But I didn't kill nobody. I gripped my phone tighter, my knuckles going white. He kept rambling, the same phrases over and over. "Didn't kill nobody. Had it coming. Ain't done nothing wrong." He noticed me holding the phone. His eyes narrowed. "I fell, okay? That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. It ain't like I killed nobody." Then he stood up and started pacing, sweating despite the cool night air, muttering under his breath. Every time I thought he might calm down, he'd start up again about how it wasn't his fault, how the other guy deserved it. I just stood there, heart trying to pound his way out of my chest, telling him Marcus would be there any minute. It felt like an eternity before I finally heard the radio crackle to life. Marcus was pulling up outside. The man walked out without another word, got into the cab, and they drove away into the darkness. The moment they were out of sight, I called the police. I told them everything, the blood, the rambling, how he kept insisting he didn't kill anyone. The dispatcher took down all the information and told me officers would follow up. Turns out I was right to be terrified. Police had been looking for him. He'd gotten into a fight at a bar earlier that night, stabbed someone with a pocket knife, and fled. He must have been running or hiding until he stumbled across our cab office. Thankfully, the victim survived. They arrested the man, whose name I later learned was Duke, right after Marcus dropped him off at his house. The next day, one of the other drivers told me Duke was a local troublemaker with a violent history, multiple arrests, including for domestic assault. I still see him sometimes, walking down the street with that same ridiculous rat tail. And every time I do, I hear his voice in my head. "It ain't like I killed nobody." That line haunted me for months. I'd worked plenty of night shift before, but that one taught me how quickly boring can turn into life-threatening. About a year ago, when I was 31, I was working overnight shifts at a small gas station outside of Billings, Montana. I know how it sounds. A woman working graveyard shifts alone isn't exactly the safest career choice. But honestly, it seemed fine at the time. The station was tiny, business was slow, and the county sheriff's office was literally across the street. Most nights, I'd see maybe 30 customers total, if that. It was one of those bitterly cold nights where time moves like molasses. Around 3:30 in the morning, I went outside to sweep the parking lot, empty the trash, and grab a quick cigarette break. I had one earbud in, half listening to music, just zoning out. That's when I noticed a man across the street in the sheriff's office parking lot. He was facing the wall, swaying slightly, and from his posture I thought, is this guy seriously taking a leak on the side of the police station? The building was dark. They closed at 4 p.m. and didn't reopen until 6 a.m. But still, not exactly the smartest choice of location. His ripped white t-shirt looked familiar. Then it clicked. He was the same creep who'd come into the store earlier that night, clearly drunk, trying way too hard to flirt with me. I ignored him and went back to sweeping, pretending I hadn't noticed. A few minutes later, headlights swept across the lot as a car pulled in. I walked the customer out after they paid, and that's when I realized a man across the street was watching us, looking at the car, looking at me, looking back at the car. My stomach twisted. After the customer drove away, I still had half a cigarette left, but the man started shouting. I couldn't make out the words, just angry sounds cutting to the quiet night. The woman who just left rolled down her window and called out, "Be careful, honey." I laughed it off, saying something stupid like, "He should be more scared of me." But I didn't feel nearly as casual as I sounded. He was pacing now, swaying and muttering, but I could see the way he was looking at me. That wild-eyed look I'd seen before in late-night drunks. The kind that never leads anywhere good. I slowly walked back inside and locked the door behind me. I quickly typed up a temporarily closed sign and printed it, just in case. I hadn't even taped it to glass before I realized he'd crossed the street. He was on my side now, walking straight toward the store. My pulse jumped as I hurried to lock the second door, just as he stumbled into the parking lot. He got right up to the glass, and I motioned over my hand, making a throat-cutting gesture like, "Sorry, closed. Go away." He stood there for a moment, breathing hard, then turned like he was going to leave, but not before screaming something at me. Not just yelling, screaming, waving his arms, spitting out angry words I couldn't make out through the glass. At that point, I knew he wasn't just some drunk fool. He was furious, and I was the only person around to take it out on. I ducked behind a counter and called the police. Told them I had an aggressive drunk man outside trying to get in. They said someone would be there right away. The second I hung up, I heard the door handles rattling. Then came the pounding, loud, desperate thuds that made the whole frame shake. He was slamming his shoulder against the glass, trying to force it open, screaming the entire time. The doors were thick, reinforced with metal frames, but every impact made my heart skip. I yelled through the door that the cops were on their way, thinking it might scare him off. Big mistake. He froze, stared at me through the glass. Then he bolted. Just like that, gone into the night. The deputies showed up within minutes, lights flashing, but by then he'd vanished. They circled the block for over an hour, checked side streets, even the alley behind the station. No sign of him anywhere. It didn't make sense. He'd been on foot, clearly intoxicated, and there wasn't anywhere nearby to hide. He didn't hurt me. The doors held, but the adrenaline stayed with me for the rest of the shift. Even with the sheriff's office right across the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back. Every sound outside made me jump. I spent the next few months glancing over my shoulder constantly, especially when taking out the trash or going to the storage shed out back. I still think about that night. If I hadn't locked the door when I did, or if I hadn't noticed him crossing the road, I don't want to imagine how things might have gone. Maybe I shouldn't have told him the police were coming. Maybe he would have stayed until they caught him. But honestly, I'm just glad I walked away from that shift in one piece. It was winter 2014 and I was 18, working weekend night shifts at a gas station in a medium-sized town in Ontario, Canada. It wasn't a bad job for someone still in community college. Decent pay, mostly quiet, though I hated missing Friday nights while my friends were out having fun. The station sat directly across from a pub and next to an alley that led into a nearby housing development. It wasn't the safest area, but I'd never had any real trouble before that night. Things started normally enough, restocking shelves, mopping floors, the usual routine. By 3 or 4 in the morning, The streets were empty except for the glow of the pub sign and the occasional car passing in the distance. I was restocking chips when I noticed a man standing at the mouth of the alley. He wasn't close enough for me to see his face clearly, just far enough back that the light didn't quite reach him. All I could make out was a dark outline of his coat, and the fact that he was facing directly toward me. At first, I figured he was waiting for a cab, maybe drunk and too tired to move. I tried not to stare. I went back behind the counter, scrolled through my phone, played a game to pass the time. When I looked up again, nearly an hour had passed. He was still there, same spot, same stance, just watching. The station was dead silent at that hour. No customers, no cars, nothing but the hum of refrigerators behind me. The longer I stared at that dark silhouette, the more that primal fear started creeping in. That deep, instinctive feeling that something was very wrong. But I told myself I was safe. The doors were locked until morning. I had a solid counter and thick glass between us. Still, I couldn't shake the thought that he was waiting for me to make a mistake. Eventually, I needed to use the restroom. I hesitated, but told myself he'd be gone when I got back. When I returned, I looked out the window. He was still there, unmoving, watching. At that point, I decided not to do my final task of the night, which involved stepping outside to check the fire safety equipment. There was absolutely no way I was going out there with that man still standing in the dark. So I just sat there behind the counter, staring back at him, counting down the minutes until sunrise. Around 6 a.m, I saw his shape move slightly. He didn't walk away normally. He just seemed to fade backward into the shadows of the alley until I couldn't see him anymore. It took me a good 10 minutes before I was confident he was actually gone. Even when my co-worker showed up to take over the shift, I couldn't shake the unease. It was still dark outside, and normally I'd walk the 10 minutes home, but not that morning. I called a taxi instead. I told my family and co-workers about it later. None of them had ever seen anyone like that near the station. They all agreed it sounded creepy, but suggested it was probably just a drunk who got lost or was waiting for a ride. But something about it didn't feel that simple. I kept imagining him standing there in the alley, not moving for hours, just watching. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy during my shifts. Every small noise outside made me look toward that alley. Every shadow in my peripheral vision made my stomach twist. Nothing ever happened again, but I never felt completely comfortable working nights after that. By the following summer, when I got accepted into university, I quit that job for good. Even now, years later, I sometimes think back to that night and wonder what he was doing there. Maybe he was just a drunk trying to find his way home. Or maybe he was waiting for me to open that door. This happened just a few nights ago. Last Friday, to be exact. I still can't shake it. It was late, around midnight, and I was at home in my apartment in Chicago watching TV when I realized I was completely out of snacks. My cupboards were bare. The only place nearby still open was a small gas station a few blocks away. I figured I'd make a quick walk, grab something, and be back in 20 minutes. When I got there, the place was nearly empty, that heavy kind of quiet that feels unnatural. Behind the counter stood a young guy, maybe early 20s, but something about him was immediately off. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled and stained, and though his face looked youthful, his skin had this strange weathered quality, like someone who'd been living rough for years. But it was his eyes that really got me. They had these yellowish spots on them. Not something you see and forget. Stop overthinking, I told myself. Just get your stuff and leave. I grabbed a couple of sports drinks and some chips and made my way to the counter. He scanned the items slowly, and when I reached for my debit card, he gave me this wide smile. "You like those drinks?" he asked. I froze. His teeth were wrong. Jagged, yellowed, and weirdly oversized, like they were fighting for space in his jaw. The smile itself looked wrong too wide, too rehearsed, like he was imitating how humans smile without quite understanding it. I nodded politely, forcing a small laugh, hoping he'd just finished the transaction. He kept smiling as I paid, eyes locked on me the entire time. Then, just as the payment went through, he said, "Hold on, I need to replace the printer paper." He disappeared into a back room, but I looked down at the card reader. There was no printer paper slot anywhere near it. I'd been in this gas station before. There was no receipt printer behind the counter either. Something about the whole situation made my stomach drop. That's when I heard a noise behind me. The sound of the door lock being turned. I spun around and saw another man by the entrance. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He definitely wasn't a customer. He was standing with his hand on the lock, twisting it shut. Every alarm in my head went off at once. I didn't think. I just grabbed my card from the reader and left the snacks on the counter. The man at the door turned toward me, and for a split second, I saw the same strange yellowish tint in his eyes. I lunged forward, trying to push past him, but he blocked my path, mumbling something I couldn't understand. I shoved him hard, and he stumbled backward into one of the aisles, knocking over a display of chips. Behind me, I heard rapid footsteps. The cashier was coming back. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I twisted the lock open and burst through the door, running as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't stop until I turned a corner and saw the glow of streetlights and a few passing cars. Only then did I realize I'd left my wallet behind. When I looked back toward the gas station, the door was closed again. No one had followed me outside, but I could swear I saw a face watching from behind the glass. Just a faint outline in the shadows, but it was enough. I haven't gone back there since. I don't even walk down that street anymore. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't acted on instinct in that moment. And honestly, I don't want to know. All I know is that I'll never ignore my gut feeling again. And now I make absolutely sure I have my groceries stocked before the sun goes down.